All right, thanks for coming out. This talk is going to be the business of plugins, so it is going to be a little bit more business focused. So if you are looking for more development stuff, there are a couple other talks going on today. Going to go ahead and introduce our speakers. Directly to my right, Mr. Mark Jaquith. You're a core developer, is that the official title?
Well, yep. Lead developer.
Yeah, lead developer for WordPress, and as well as a fantastic plugin called Velocity Page. And I'll let him tell you a little bit more about that.
So I have a ton of plugins, but Velocity Page is my first commercial venture, and it's a page layout tool, and it happens on the front end. So what you see is what you get. You're actually dragging around text and images and YouTube videos and all that. And when you hit save, it's not going to look different to the user. So yeah.
Cool. All right. And also with us is Mr. Andrew Norcross. Among other plugins, he has done Design Palette Pro. Tell us about that. I'm going to figure out a better way to do it. Yeah, just take it out.
Puff it out so you can scan it.
That's easier.
So, yeah, Design Palette Pro is a back-end user interface for design for designing existing Genesis child themes for essentially filling the gap between a off-the-shelf, happy with what it looks, and then actually having custom design and development done. The idea of, a lot of folks are perfectly happy with the general look and feel, but they want put a coat of paint on it. They want some color changes, they want some personality, and that provides them the ability to do that without having to write CSS, having to do anything special other than, pick what they want.
All right, so the way we're going to do this is we've got a few prepared questions first, and we're going to go through those, and then after a little while, we're going to go ahead and open the floor to questions. So if you do have questions, keep in mind we are going to save them for a little bit later. So to get started, for both of you guys, what first drew you to plugin development?
So I got involved with WordPress back in 2004, and that was during the WordPress 1.2 release when they introduced plugins. And that was a huge feature that drew me to WordPress in the first place because I could add functionality or change functionality without changing the core. And that's kind of what drew me to this whole thing in the first place. Is I had a blog and I wanted to change stuff about it. And plugins are an amazing and really scalable way to do that.
For myself, I got involved in 2006, 2007 in that area, and I initially was doing theme work, and it was really just taking existing themes and changing small bits. And then I found that I wanted to add certain pieces that just didn't exist yet, or off-the-shelf plugins I found for what I wanted to do did way too much, or they did it in a way I didn't like, or they had stopped being developed by whomever made them initially, and they were things that were needed for the project I was working on, so I rebuilt it. And I just find plugins to be a lot of fun because they tend to be way more focused from a development standpoint than having to do a theme, which is covering a lot more ground.
So, other than, because you've got free plugins, which you guys have both done, and you do those mostly for the community, what would the goal of a premium plugin to be, other than the obvious solution to make money?
Well, with the premium plugin, you can offer support at a higher level because they're essentially compensating you for your time. The user might think they're buying the code, and in a sense they are, in that you give them the code when they buy it, but they're really buying a relationship with you. And it enables you to build more complex plugins and support those in a scalable way, whereas you couldn't build something free and support that, and you'd have no time left. So it enables it to scale up and enables that really great relationship between you and the person using it.
Yeah, other than the support issue being the biggest one, and being able to pay for ongoing development, that it doesn't turn into essentially a pyramid scheme where I'm running out of time, because my company also has a services side. So we maintain client projects, we have ongoing client work, we have our own internal stuff, and we have both free and commercial plugins. The freemium name's kind of weird because there's been free stuff that I've made that's really nice, and then there's been commercial stuff I've seen that has been pure crap. So, commercial just seems like a better word. But
Yeah,
it's one of those things where if people are paying money for it, they tend to be a little more invested. And it sounds weird, but they look at what they're going to buy. They make sure it works the way, or at least they think it's going to work the way they want. Not always the case, but when, with some plugins I've had in the repository, it doesn't do, nothing about the name, description, functionality is anything remotely close to what a person complaining about it not doing is complaining about. And, that can get real frustrating that, they're like, why doesn't this Corvette drive through mud? Like, well, it's never meant to, and it's never going to. And then that becomes my fault as the developer, and that's just kind of really deflating. So, doing stuff on the commercial side helps to, kind of validate what I'm doing. Because if nobody buys it, then it wasn't that good of an idea.
Yeah. Obviously, when it comes to free versus commercial, the free plugins are obviously available on the WordPress repository for the most part, or GitHub. What do you think is the best vehicle for a commercial plugin as far as getting it out there and making sure that people know about it?
I honestly don't know if there's a best way. There are several different ways. So one way is you could release a light version of the plugin, not really a crippled version, but say there's a pro version that has more features that are niche or more complicated. So that you can offer a light version, a free version that would be completely suitable for half of the people who use it, and then that also can act as its own vehicle for marketing it, because people get to use the free one, and then they decide that they want to upgrade to the pro. You could also do it sort of the easy digital downloads way, or I guess the WooCommerce way as well, where the core plugin is free and it does a lot, but then there are specific add-ons you buy for like a payment gateway or something like that. And a lot of those things take a lot of development time to like a PayPal gateway is super annoying to code. So you can make it such that the things that sort of take the most time are the things that drive your revenue.
For myself, I've not released any light or freemium versions of things. I don't like that model myself. I know other people like it, and that's fine. I still release free plugins, and the stuff that I release for free is for free. The stuff that I sell is the stuff that I sell. And many times I've seen a lot of folks that release stuff, the light version, and really all it is a vehicle for a big banner ad for their pro one. Or it's not technically crippled, but it's so limiting that it's simply not usable. And me as a user becomes more frustrated than anything else. I like the extension model in terms of doing add-ons and those custom pieces that not everybody needs that would make any core product bloated beyond belief. Not everybody's going to use Stripe. Not everybody wants whatever other payment gateway in New Zealand is. So you make those add-ons, the people that need them gladly pay for them because it's tailored to what they want, and it works. Beyond that is finding if your product is tied to a certain type of user or a certain group of users, like in my case, Design Palette only works on the Genesis framework. So there's a natural tie-in there with people who use Genesis. I'm not going to market it to Headway people because there's no need for it. It wouldn't work anyway. So, finding where the user, where your natural user base is, and then doing whatever it is they do, going to the places that they go. Trying to market it or to everybody won't work. There is not a plugin that exists that is for everybody. So, figuring out where they are, and then if you're not good or comfortable marketing, which most developers aren't. I put myself in that same category. I don't like selling stuff. I like building things. So matching up with people who are good at that, and that's what they like to do, and that's what they know how to do. Allow them to do it. Because in theory, yeah, I could do all of this by myself, but I wouldn't get nearly as much done. it probably wouldn't be as good of a product because I'm too busy trying to sell it as I build it and do everything in between. So in my case, we've actually partnered up with Studio Press, and they do a lot of marketing on our behalf, and we have an arrangement for that, and they have a reach that I will never have. I'm totally okay with that. They're a much bigger company than I am, so they're a natural fit for that, and figuring out where your product fits in the space and matching up with the people that are there instead of trying to bend over backwards to pull them into where you are. If you're trying to sell to them, you need to go where they are, not the other way around.
I think that's an interesting segue, and if anyone is here for the first talk that Kareem gave, he kind of touched on some of these things about partnering or hiring people who have strengths that you don't. And I did the same thing with Velocity Page. I partnered with 2 people, so I'm on code. We have 1 person on sort of business and marketing and partnerships, and we have 1 person on support. And it's really great that I don't have to worry about marketing or support, which are not things I ever envisioned myself doing. And I think there's a lot of people take on too much, and they try and be everything to everyone, and it gets really stressful. Like, I don't want to be up at 3:30 a.m. answering support tickets.
I'm guessing the answer is going to be support, so maybe probably go past that, but what is the biggest challenge you faced with your plugin business?
I'm not going to say support, actually.
Okay. Pippin talked about that last year, and he's like, support. It sucks.
I think the hardest thing is getting in the mindset of your target users and giving them exactly what they need. I found, because I can't unknow what I know, and if I'm not selling a plugin to someone like me, it's probably going to be someone who with less technical skill and with a different perspective on things, and I can try and simulate that, but I'm probably going to get it wrong. For instance, one of the themes or one of the features in Velocity Page is that you can have, we have sort of templates that come with it where it's like a full page takeover. Instead of integrating into your theme, you just get a landing page that's pre-designed. And I kind of thought that was a bit gimmicky because they're not going to match the rest of the site, and they're all very different looking. And I completely discounted that, and I was 100% wrong, and people love it. And people are like, yes, I want more of these things. So for me, it's sort of figuring out exactly what people are going to want and how they're going to use the product.
Support is tricky. I mean, someone like Pippin with the huge user base that is free, because the core of it is free, but also as soon as you are making a product that other people are using to make money, the support tickets tend to become more frantic because they're theoretically losing money. Or it's one of those, I'm supposed to open my store tomorrow and this doesn't work. And it's like, well, why didn't you test it until now? But beyond that, and we actually, we do have someone who does support as well, and most tickets don't bubble up to me. The ones that do are the real kind of esoteric, like this doesn't work and nobody knows why. Other than that, the biggest thing is almost trying to contain myself in terms of features, because there's a lot of things I could build, and there's a lot of things that, like building stuff. I have a crazy idea. I should build that. Maybe not. Design Palette was my 3rd commercial product. My first one failed miserably. I think I got 9 sales total. And it was something that I spent a decent amount of time building. It was doing star ratings, because there's one very large plugin out there that does that I don't even know this country. It's garbage. It's just poorly written. It's really old, which means it has a lot of legacy crap that he either can't or won't get rid of. I did not do enough research to realize that, yes, that was the most available and most widely used version of that functionality, but there's not enough people using that functionality to warrant something else. So the second thing I made in a weekend on a whim to show somebody how to use a particular WordPress function, the WP localized script. on how to pass variables into JavaScript. And that plugin sold much, much better than the first one. So the idea being that just because I can build it doesn't mean I should build it. And figuring out, will anybody other than me find this useful? And more importantly, will anybody feel that it is valuable enough beyond what is already available to be willing to pay for it? Because if something out there does 90% of what yours does for free, they're probably going to be okay with 90%. And, you know, if it's, the other thing that I found is that if you're focusing on back-end functionality, it's got to work really, really well. And if it's focusing on front-end, it's got to look really, really good. Because if it doesn't look right on somebody's theme, they're not going to like it, regardless if it functionality-wise is the best thing out there. And vice versa on the back end, if it's clunky, it doesn't matter if it does everything right. If it's not user-friendly, it's not going to appear to be a good fit either.
I think it's interesting what people are willing to pay for, and I think you can a little bit predict this in that the things that give people more power, things that give people more control over their site or allow them to drastically transform their site are the things they're going to do better. So like yours, where you let them drastically change the design of their site in a really easy way. I let them, lay out content in an easy way. Adding a star system, it's just kind of it's a small value add, and like what they might think that's worth might be below the threshold where they're willing to whip out their credit card.
You touched on it a little bit already, but how do you really decide whether it should be free or it should be, a commercial plugin, or maybe even going with the freemium model? What makes that decision for you? Like, oh, I'm just building this for fun, or I really think people would want to buy this, or is there more to it than that?
I mean, I kind of started to answer that, but yeah, how useful it is to the person and what power it gives them. Also, sometimes I want to just do something for fun, and I know it's weird. I think you're the same way. Like, my hobbies are what I do for work, so it's sometimes it's a bit on a continuum there. So like the two of us partnered up on a plugin called GIF Drop, which is just like a animated GIF repository powered by WordPress, just like a front end thing where you just drop the files on and you can click on them and they animate, and then you can get the URL to share. So if you have giant GIF collections like this man right here, and like I never thought like, oh, I need to monetize this. Like, it just completely seemed like something that would be super fun to do, and it'd be something cool to show off, to show people like, hey, here's what we can do with WordPress.
Yeah, with that in particular, I use that as a way to get more familiar with Backbone, which I know the previous speaker talked about. That sometimes I don't always get the opportunity to try new things with client work, because I'm under a deadline and they have a scope, and if I don't know what I'm doing and I know I only have a few weeks to get it done, I may not try to use something new that I've never done before, because it could take me 2 weeks to figure it out. And then all of a sudden I have 4 days left to finish the rest of whatever it is. So one thing with deciding to sell something or not is, if I'm selling something, I'm making the commitment to support it and to continue on developing it and be there. Because, I mean, nothing's worse than you buying a plugin or a theme or something and then the developer's gone. I mean, it's bad enough on a free plugin, but it's even worse when you've actually paid money for it. So the stuff that I release for free, there's no guarantee that I'm ever going to touch the code again. I mean, even the stuff that I put in the repository, I'm making some inherent promise that I'm going to keep it up to date or I'll get it removed. But there's even more code that I have on GitHub that I wrote for a test to see if I could do something, or it was a small piece of a larger client project that I thought was useful. And I just put it up there. If somebody finds it useful, great. If not, no big deal. But I'm making no guarantees that I'm ever going to even answer a support question, much less support it. And the other thing where I kind of draw the line is the free stuff that I build and release are usually very, very focused single-use things. They do one thing, they only do one thing. They're not made to do anything else, and I'm not going to make them do anything else. So if you want that one thing, great. If not, no problem. But that usually creates less support issues because it either does that thing or it doesn't. It's not subjective in that regard. And so the commercial stuff are things that have a wider use case, have a larger scale, that are going to take more support time just by their nature. And by releasing it, I'm basically making a promise that I'm going to be there. And that's kind of the relationship when they whip out their credit card, is that I'm going to be there and they're going to be there. So,
Absolutely agree.
With that in mind, how long should a plugin basically live? Because all software has a life cycle. And at what point do you say, you know what, this version just needs to go away, even if it is a premium plugin?
Well, I think the first two features you should build for your plugin are an API and an export feature. And that's part of that, I think, the contract that you enter into with users is that I'm going to be there, but also if I'm not backing you into a corner here. And I think plugins should be around until, you can't maintain them anymore for whatever reason, and you should probably take steps to, sell it, hand it off, release it free, get invested add-on users, add-on makers to adopt it. Or maybe maybe WordPress core had started adding features that make your plugin, moot or at least less useful. At that point, maybe you rewrite it to just be a small add-on to the core feature and let it gracefully sunset.
yeah, I mean, I made a plugin that in the media library prior to the most recent release where it gave you the list similar to posts, where if all you wanted was the URL of the actual image, you had to open the image, then go to this field, then copy this field. And I had to do that once 37 times in a row. And after the third one, I stopped and I made a plugin that all it did was give me a small jQuery Ajax thing to display a field with the actual URL of the media item, not the attachment page, but the physical, JPEG or whatever. And that was solving my own problem. That's all it did. I released it. They changed the media manager. It's no longer relevant. When I'm looking to build something, if it's free, if it becomes less useful or it doesn't need to be there anymore, then I don't feel bad sunsetting it. If it's a commercial thing, part of what I do on the research side before I even write a single line of code is figuring out what that life cycle is. If it's something that is inherently tied to another product, another platform, a core feature of WordPress that in theory isn't going to change anytime soon, then you've got a longer expectation. I mean, the web changes so fast that any prediction you make now could be moot in 6 months. It could have a cycle of 5 years. It could, depending on what it is, it can evolve with with WordPress. Something like Velocity Page or even, like Design Palette, which is on Genesis. As Genesis evolves, naturally the plugin will evolve, or it will no longer be useful. And, a lot of times you can kind of look at your user base and figure out whether it needs to keep living. Because if people keep buying it, then people will still think it's useful, which means you should probably invest in it or find somebody who will. Because, there's certain stuff I've written that I just don't care about anymore. For one reason or another, I just don't feel like dealing with it, and not a money issue. It's a time issue. I mean, I've got I have a business, I have a wife, I have kids, I have animals, I have a limited amount of time in my day, and sometimes I just don't really care about some plugin I wrote 3 years ago. But there probably is somebody out there who does. So trying to match that up. I know that there's been some talk about setting up a more formal adoption program for plugins for folks that have released stuff and just don't have the ability to maintain it anymore, matching it up with people who will. I know there's some informal stuff out there, and I know some developers who have kind of more clout, so to speak, are able to get out there that they're retiring or whatever the case may be, and people will step up and take over. For smaller folks, it's probably not as easy. I know there's a tag somewhere but I've never seen it. So, I mean, perhaps, some more conversation about setting up a better way to do that. But sometimes just functionality just goes away for a reason. And it's okay to let it go.
You also just need to be continuously listening to your users and continuously reevaluating your assumptions about what this thing is for and how people are using it. Because if you just make that determination once and you stick to that, the web changes so quickly. People change, their capabilities change, their expectations change. That could be completely wrong in 6 months. So as an example, WordPress many years ago, probably 2006, added the pages feature. Before it was just you had your blog posts, and we wanted the ability. We made the pages feature so you had the ability to have an about page. We thought, okay, you'll have an about page, maybe a contact page, maybe one other page. We had this really limited view of what it was for, and we started asking people how they're using it. And within a couple of years, using WordPress as a CMS, being largely pages, not posts, was the majority use case. And we completely did not see that coming, and we had to embrace that.
Now, obviously, from the way core development has changed, a lot of it is now plugin based. How has that changed the way you handle your plugin business?
In what way? I'm not.
Do you think about is this a feature that could long term maybe be something that we talk about developing free plugins. Is this something like maybe long term this could be something that could be added to core, but I want to just try it out first and see if that many people use it. I guess then what's the determination for whether or not something gets added? Like how do you figure that out?
Yeah, it is kind of in flux. So about a year ago, I guess, a little bit more, we started doing WordPress core development first in plugins. So instead of having a big patch that only developers can apply, we started building the new feature in a plugin, and anyone can go install it and try it out. I don't know if I'm thinking about something, and from the outset, I'm seeing that it could be really useful for WordPress core itself. I might be more likely to find other people to work on it with me. Because if it's something for WordPress core, it needs to be more than just one person's vision. So I'll take a much more collaborative approach to that.
And the idea of something that might make it in core is, I've had folks ask me, or the question come up like, well, what are you going to do if? Like, well, there's nothing preventing code that I write from getting into core anyway. There's nothing preventing people from taking my commercial plugin and removing, giving me attribution and releasing it for free, minus my copyrighted imagery and stuff like that. Zero legal issue I have, and frankly, it's not a moral issue because it's not illegal, and that's that. So that would be managing my business in fear. And if I'm afraid of what someone may do at some mythical point, then I need to get a new line of work, because then I will constantly make bad decisions out of fear and reaction to something that hasn't actually happened. Perfect example, 2009, I had building a client site where I had a whole lot of custom fields, and it was just a real pain in the butt to set it up. So I ended up making what became the custom MetaBot class, CMB, which is now CMB2. Web Dev Studios, about a year ago, one of their guys, Justin Sternberg, had been big in helping us develop it, and they took it over gladly. We've been talking for years about getting some standardized method of doing metaboxes in core. Hasn't happened yet, but we would love nothing else, nothing more than that to get adopted. It's not something we sell, but a lot of it is, like there's certain plugins I write that I write for other developers. And those people, are the worst to market to, because they know that they can build it. So unless it's something that saves them so much time that it's insane, like form builders, because, I can build a form, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
I have better things to do, like anything. So, you know, unless it saves them a huge amount of time, you're not appealing to them by offering something that they can't do. So the stuff that I build for developers, that's usually the stuff I release for free. I put it on GitHub. It's like, hey, here, have at it. If you want it, great. Found it useful, go for it. Like airplane mode, I was at a bunch of us got together out in Oregon over the summer, and the internet was really, really crappy there. We had like 10 MiFis, and that was the only internet we had. So I got tired of loading, even in my local environment, I got tired of loading the Google fonts and trying to go to Gravatar, even knowing damn well I was never going to find it. So I ended up building a small thing just to prevent some of those external calls. That turned into, like the guy that's leading 4.1, John. He submitted 5 or 6 pull requests on GitHub, and a bunch of other people have submitted good stuff. And that was something that, again, was scratching my itch. That who knows if that ever gets adopted to core. I could, it's one of those things where, because I find it useful, has nothing to do with what is actually useful. Because what my first experience with WordPress was writing code for WordPress. I've never been a regular user. I probably never, I never will be. So, like Mark was saying earlier, I don't know what normal users find useful and find frustrating. Talking to them helps, but again, I spend so much time in there, I just forget that I just inherently know all the ins and outs of the admin to the point of I don't even think about it. Whereas other people, for the first time, they're just blown away because they don't know what the heck's going on. So, yeah, core does what it does. I obviously keep up with it to make sure that anything I've written still works. But beyond that, I mean, I can react if something happens, but I can't be afraid of what might happen.
So how many people here use Gravity Forms or have heard of it? It's like 60% of the room. Who thinks that we're going to drop in something as big and full-featured as Gravity Forms into WordPress core? No. So I think with a lot of these things, integration of some small part of it or something similar would not at all be the kiss of death, because it wouldn't do 10% of what a really well-coded premium plugin like Gravity Forms would do. And what might actually happen is now people are aware, oh, I can build forms in WordPress, and your plugin could be like the next step for that, whether or not it adds on to the WordPress core features or if it's an alternative that people could use. Now they're aware that that's something they can do, and when they're sort of like, WordPress has a really high barrier for what goes in. It needs to be useful to a lot of people. So we're not going to put in a lot of features that only a few people are going to use. So it kind of by design, it's going to leave people hungry for more features, more power.
All right. At this point, we'll go ahead and open it up to questions. Over there. Just wait a second to get the microphone to you so the video picks it up.
Hello? Have you guys done anything with licensing where it's free for personal use, but you charge for commercials and you get support only for the commercials? What do you guys think about that sort of model?
The question was about licensing free for personal use versus charging for commercial.
Let me do it first.
I've seen certain libraries do that, like especially in the JavaScript space. Myself, the stuff that I've sold does have licensing. They have annual licenses. I use EDD to sell the stuff that I make, and they have an add-on that talk perfect. The extension model. They have an add-on that does software licensing, and that's what I use. But for me, it's like define personal. It's such a murky space. Like when it's things like images, like I know there's a lot of imagery, actual images is like free for you. Like I'm not making any print ads, so it's pretty easy to say it's personal. But that line is so blurry now of what is considered personal and then what could be considered commercial that you have to almost verify it by a human being and make a judgment call of whether, and that, like, I barely have time to sleep. I don't really have time to check up on everybody's site to see if they're selling something or have affiliate links, because then that could be technically, you know, it becomes such a muddied water that I wouldn't know how to even enforce that. And frankly, the people that do have those licenses, I don't know how they enforce it either, if they do. Yeah, so it's an unenforceable idea.
Keep in mind, it's also kind of legally suspect. So if your plugin is GPL, which it probably should be, you can't tell them how they can use it. Right? So one of the freedoms you get is it's free for any purpose. So that means you can't tell them you may not use this for a business purpose. You know, so think of the most evil thing someone could do to their plugin. You can't legally forbid them from doing that. What you can do is decide who you're going to support. So you might only support the sites that they use it on that they actually own, so that they don't buy one license and give it out to 1,000 clients, and then the clients want those sites supported. So I think more in the support arena, you can do it. And that scales a little better because you don't have to go out and like proactively see how are they using it until they come to you and they're saying, hey, go to this page on my site and it's having a problem.
The marketing guy that does what you guys don't like to do, and I just a couple months ago hired a developer to build a plugin. It's a niche, but I think it's got a number of people that will use it in the independent thousands eventually. But I'm wondering about support. I've noticed. I also am the digital marketing manager for a company in Winter Park, and so I do our site, which is all in WordPress. And I'm noticing that a lot of plugins make it really pretty difficult these days to get support, even if you pay for them. They tell you they'll get back within 24 hours, and maybe they do, maybe they don't. And a lot of them don't do any kind of phone support. They don't do any kind of chat support. So you're basically left emailing, wonder if anybody's reading it. So my model is a recurring monthly charge for the people who use it. And I want to make sure that they're supported really well. It's also going to launch in a few different countries around the world initially. So, I'm sorry, let's get a little long, but support, say, on the other side of the world, Asia, Pacific Rim, so on and so forth. Support here, support in Europe. How do you handle that? Do you worry about it? Do you only do the email support for that in that case, since they're on the other side of the world? Do you do phone for 8 to 6 here, and then email otherwise on?
So basically your question was like, how do you handle support in general, like the different variances in support, right? It's kind of a loaded question.
Yeah, we've not done phone support. It's primarily email based. They submit a form and they get the auto reply so they know at least that it got entered into our system. We try and get, like, if their question requires some discussion between us before we can give them an answer, we'll reply and let them know we got this, we're discussing it, we'll let you know. If you start moving into phone and chat, there's sort of a minimum investment in terms of support people, and that's hard to justify at the outset. Unless you're really confident that it's gonna be huge in the next 3 to 4 months. Floating 3 full-time support people on it might be kind of untenable. So I kind of think that you have to start with the assumption that you're going to have probably one support person, and it may be you or it may be someone else, and they're going to be working, kind of all hours, for a while until you get to the point where you can, I think once you hire that second person, you should probably hire them on the other side of the world if it's a global market for your plugin. Obviously, if it's not, then hire East Coast and West Coast so you can maximize daylight hours. But I think once you make that jump to 2, you get much better coverage on that.
For us, when we have someone that does support for us, and she lives in Vancouver. So there's the West Coast part. I'm in the East Coast. My business partner's in Indiana, which I think technically is still East Coast time. But anyway, I don't know time zones.
Depends on the year.
Yeah.
What part of Indiana?
Yeah, I know, it's just get rid of them. But, I mean, I would never do phone support, ever. First off, trying to debug a problem over the phone is a nightmare. And furthermore, it can become, I mean, I just think of me trying to help my parents, and my parents are intelligent people. They've been using computers for 30 years. I still refuse to help my mother over the phone with her computer. I will drive an hour and a half to our house and do it. That's how much I don't want to do the phone support for my family, who I like, who have, over the course of the years, paid me way more money than $49. So, you know, email support creates that. It makes them actually, or not makes them, but encourages them to actually outline their problem, and not this doesn't work. At least with Design Palette, one of the things that we did is once you verify the license key, there's a support widget in the actual plugin itself, in the admin screen. When you submit your request, along with it comes a whole list of stuff: your current version of WordPress, your current installed, your active plugins, your current theme, versions of PHP and MySQL. The things, nothing personally identifiable, but the things that I'm always going to have to ask before I can start doing a support thing, it's right there for me. And what it really allows me to, it goes in, we use Help Scout personally, and what that allows us to do more than anything is keep up with it. Because if people are just randomly calling me or emailing me, then I don't, I'm going to lose it every time. And then that's going to be a much more of a support issue than, maybe taking longer to reply. One of the other things we do, at least with us, is there are three tiers of the plugin, and they're tied to number of sites, but also on the high end, it's priority support, where on that one we say you will get a response within 3 hours. Now, it's not a fix always, but it's, like Mark was saying, it's the acknowledgement, like, yes, we got it. Sometimes it is a very easy answer, sometimes it's not, and then we can start walking through. But then we have a history of it, especially with something like Help Scout. We see how often someone gets support, and maybe you can identify that maybe this person is not the right kind of customer, and you can and you have data to back that up. Whereas something like phone call, and not to mention, I mean, I usually end up working from 7 to 1, and then from 3 to 6:30, and then 8:30 to about midnight. So someone would have to know that and call me at one of those times. But at the same time, those are the only times I have to get anything done, which means I'm not answering my phone from anybody. Family, friends, I don't care, I'm not answering it. So the idea of, like, I get phone support for certain things, it makes absolute sense. But I think on the technology side, especially for things like software, it's really an outdated idea that doesn't match. Because I'm going to be more frustrated trying to explain to you over the phone what my screen looks like than it is for us to go back and forth, written, and actually figure out the problem.
I'm going to tie into maybe a previous question as well about differentiating between personal and business users. I think not quality of support, but maybe alacrity of support, the quickness with which they get a response and a solution can be a way you can differentiate. And I think, business users, it's one of these weird things where, someone has a line item in a budget for support for product X or website X, and they need to use that money or they don't get it next year. And they're willing to pay a lot more just so that they can tell their boss, hey, we're covered on this. So that can be one way to differentiate. And the other point is that when you are working on the pricing for your plugin, you really need to keep in mind what your support costs are going to be. You need to keep in mind how many people are likely to have problems, how complicated those problems are going to be, and how much skill is going to be needed on your end with who you hire to do support to get those issues solved. And those financials can make or break your business.
We got time for one more quick one.
some of my favorite plugins are actually the ones that don't have a huge code base and they only do one thing. You just turn it on and it works. It does what it's supposed to do. One thing that I kind of notice is that you actually don't need to update that very small plugin very often. And now there's a new feature with WordPress plugins, and when you're looking them up, it tells you, oh, this plugin hasn't been updated for 2 years. And sometimes when I see that, I kind of get a little worried, but at the same time, I can understand if the plugin didn't need to be updated because it's such a simple feature, and it does one small thing, and it doesn't need to be updated. So I'm just curious if you guys have any opinions on that.
Yes, I find it very annoying because I have several plugins that are literally one line. They remove a filter, they add a filter, something like that, and it's really annoying that it, after 2 years, it'll get booted out of the repository, and I forget sometimes. And it's annoying to the user where like, oh, I have to update this plugin, and literally all it says is, yep, it still works. So I mean, this is kind of a core problem. I think I think we should allow auto updates at very minimum for things that are just bumping the compatibility, just saying, yes, I do still work on this new version. We shouldn't bother the user with that. We should just update that info and call it a day.
Yeah, I mean, the very small code-based stuff is kind of a double-edged sword because the 2-year notice, which has been there for a while, it's been a couple of years now that it's actually been implemented. If no one has looked at it in 2 years, like the average user doesn't know that it's a single-use one line of code. They just know that it hasn't been touched in 2 years, and it says works up to 3.4.2. Yeah, which might as well say Windows 95. So, I mean, auto would be probably the right one to ask, but my understanding is that if you keep the README file updated with the version compatibility, that will reset that 2-year mark.
Yep.
So as long as you're keeping if you can't be bothered to update a README file, which I will admit I forget to do as well, like, that's not a knock on anybody, then that's probably a good sign that it's been abandoned. And maybe reach out to that developer and see what's going on, and maybe they've moved careers, maybe they just don't care anymore, and take it over. Quickest way to be an author.
Yeah, actually thinking maybe just WordPress.org should email the author and say, you haven't updated this in 6 months. Are you still working on it? Is it still compatible? Kind of a good thing to just stay. I mean, it doesn't 15 minutes every 6 months to go in and bump the version, to verify it works and bump the version number. It's not that bad. You just need to get that reminder.
Alrighty, thank you everybody. Especially thank you, Mark, Andrew.